class, this is Group 5 and we're going to be presenting on formal fallacies and ways to avoid formal fallacies. My name is AGOLIA DATONTE. We're going to be exploring the various philosophers and their contributions on formal fallacies, types of formal fallacies, ways to prevent them, how to identify it, and so forth. So a formal fallacy is an argument, is an error in reasoning based on its structure rather than its content. And a fallacious argument might seem sound or convincing, but with great scrutiny, we can see its flaws. So I'm going to be talking on Aristotle. Aristotle is known as the father of logic, and he has made great contributions on the study of formal fallacies. So in his book, Sophistical Refutations, he studied what fallacies were, and he categorized them into two, informal and formal, and he focused greatly on formal fallacies. He defined formal fallacies as an argument that seems convincing but is not. And he identified 13 types of sophistical refutations, and he categorized them into two. Sophistical refutations that are dependent on language and sophistical refutations that are not dependent on language, that is, in dicton and extra dicton. He pointed out that inexperienced humans mistake false arguments for genuine ones, and he pointed out fundamental concepts that will help prevent these fallacies, such as syllogism, refutations, proof, deductions, and so forth. The next person we're going to be looking at is Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon also made a great impact on the study of formal fallacies. In his work, Idols, he identified 4 types of idols: idols of the tribe, idols of the cave, idols of the marketplace, and idols of the theater. So idols of the trade, in idols of the tribe, he pointed out that fallacies are due to man's perceptiveness of patterns where there are no patterns. Then in idols of the cave, its fallacies are due to man's misunderstandings. In fallacies of the theater, idols of the theater, fallacies are due to man's uniqueness in the perception of nature. Francis Bacon has made great impact on the study of fallacies in his work Idols and Novum Organum. So I'm going to be handing it over to Desire.
To Desire Ignatius, and I'll continue on the various philosophical thoughts of formal fallacies and fallacies. So then, just as Mills speaks on deductive reasoning and common fallacies that happen in deductive reasoning, he first showed us various principles that were used in causal relationships to understand, which is method of agreement and method of differences. So agreement regards how bringing various cases, like two arguments, and then understanding similarities between these agreements. Then differences, bringing two cases, then
a member of Group 5, and I'm going to be talking about fallacy, logical fallacy, and the need for us to study fallacy. So, fallacy is a deductive form of argument. It is an idea that people think is true, but in fact is false. Fallacy has to do with words, content, structure, forms, rules, guiding an argument. Formal fallacy. Formal fallacy may be defined as a pattern in which an argument doesn't follow the logical structure that a normal argument is meant to follow. Arguments are meant to be valid, sound, and sound. But in formal fallacies, it doesn't care about whether the argument is actually true, but for it to be valid. The two types of errors in formal fallacies that we have are when the premises don't flow logically into the conclusion, and when there's a factual error in the premise, and when the premises don't flow logically into the conclusion. Factual error is talking about when there's not enough evidence to support the premises, the statements made during the argument. While when the premises don't flow into the conclusion, it's somehow self-explanatory. Yeah, so the contrast between formal fallacies and informal fallacies is the fact that formal fallacies has to do with structure, forms, and rules, while informal fallacies has to do with the content. So this contrast is what's caused for the need for us to study fallacies. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is ESHEYA and I'm a member of ITUH, and I'll be talking about the various kinds of formal fallacies. So diving in, we know that formal fallacies are basically reasoning errors that people make every single day by breaking the rules of logic in their conversations or their various arguments anywhere. So these mistakes are usually seen where the conclusion doesn't really flow directly from the premises given. And so spotting these mistakes and being able to identify these mistakes can help us understand, evaluate, and make better arguments when we speak. So, the first one we'll be talking about is the fallacy of affirming the consequence. The fallacy of affirming the consequence, also known as the fallacy of converse error, is a logical fallacy that occurs when an argument mistakenly assumes that if a certain condition is true, if a certain cause is true, if a certain condition is true, then the cause is true. That means that it happens if we wrongly assume that if the result of something is true, then the cause must also be true. An example of this can be, if it's raining, the ground is wet. So then the conclusion will be that the ground is wet, so it must be raining. But in actual sense, it is fallacious because anything could cause the ground to be wet. Someone could water the garden, someone could spill water, anything could happen, and therefore the ground becomes wet. Next one we'll be talking about is the fallacy of denying the antecedent. This is a logical fallacy in which a negative consequence is incorrectly inferred from a negative antecedent. It's also known as fallacy of inverse error. That is to say that it usually occurs when we think that the cause of something is true, but then the result of something isn't true either. So, an example of this is, if it's morning, the sun is out. That's the result is that the sun is out. So the conclusion will be like, if the sun isn't out, the sun isn't out, so it's not morning. Anything can happen that the sun can be out. It could be cloudy, there could be an eclipse, something can happen even if it's morning, the sun will still be out. Another one we have is the fallacy of four terms. The fallacy of four terms is a logical fallacy that describes a syllogism containing four terms instead of the usual three terms, which are the major, the minor, and the major terms, the minor terms, and the conclusion. So, in a valid argument, we should only have three terms We should only have 3 terms. If there are more than 3 terms, then it's most likely going to be a problem. It could cause confusion or bring in unnecessary information into the document, which we don't need. An example is all birds have wings. A sparrow is a flying creature. Therefore, a sparrow has wings. Note that these terms do not match up, making this argument invalid, as we can see that they are talking about flying creatures, birds, wings, and sparrows. These are 4 things in the argument, which is not necessary. We just need. So again, we look at that of the fallacy of existential fallacy. The fallacy of existential fallacy. Existential fallacy is a type of reasoning that happens as a result of one assuming the existence or non-existence of things based on the class it belongs to. It's the errors that happens when we make assumptions about the existence of things based on their category. For instance, see this example, we see mermaids are mythical creatures. The category that mermaids belong under is mythical creatures. So therefore, the conclusion is that therefore mermaids don't exist. Meanwhile, if you think in actual sense, there have been stories of mermaids popping up here and there. People classify them under mythical creatures. So some people think, oh, they don't exist, others think they exist, which is when we talk about under existential. So for the rest of the other formal fallacies, I'll be handing over to Daniela to talk about them.
Good day, everyone. My name is OLUWADAMILOLA. I'm a member of 5, and I'll be continuing the types of fallacies that ESHEYA and ADAOBI already talked about. So, first, the fallacy of illicit. This type of fallacy is a fallacy that occurs when the major term is not included in the major premise, but is included in the conclusion. An example is no animals are trees, all zebras are mammals, therefore no zebras are trees. Yeah, in this example, it shows that it is not that the major term is not properly covered in all the premises. And secondly, the fallacy of illicit minor. This is the type of fallacy that occurs when the minor term is not distributed evenly in the premises, but it's in the conclusion. Fallacy of undistributed middle. It violates the rule of categorical syllogism, where there should be at least one a middle term in premises. And fallacy of excluded premises. This is a type of fallacy that occurs when the both premises are negative, which will lead to an invalid conclusion. Fallacy of drawing affirmative conclusion from a negative premise is a type of fallacy that occurs when the premises are negative and the conclusion is positive, which makes the statement not sound logically. Thank you.
My name is AYUBA ZAZINA, and just understanding formal fallacies, one also has to understand the differences between formal fallacies and informal fallacies, which brings us to the differences between formal and informal fallacies. First, we have the meaning. Formal fallacies are invalid deductive arguments, There are also fallacies that have to do with the logical form of an argument, while informal fallacies are fallacies that have to do with the context or content of an argument. Then we have types of errors. As explained, we have affirming the consequence, which, for example, which can we just explain? For example, if A then C therefore A. Then denying the antecedent, if A then C, not A therefore not C. Then we also have occurrence. Formal fallacies mostly occur in academic and philosophical works, while informal fallacies occur in everyday discourse. That's like our everyday chattings, and then they also occur in advertisements or media. Then we have an ease of identification. We all know that formal fallacies occur, they have to do with logical structure, so they can be easily identified by just looking at it. You don't have to understand. While informal fallacies need to be understood, and because of the hard or the wrong language or wrong meaning of the argument. While then, last but not least, we have effect of validity and persuasiveness. Formal fallacies make an argument invalid because the conclusion does not logically flow from the premises, while informal fallacies make an argument invalid because of the flawed language or misinterpretation of the argument. Thank you.
My name is CHIWETE, CHIMMAMANDA, NATASHA, and I'll be taking ways of avoiding fallacies. So there are numerous ways of avoiding fallacies, but I will be mentioning two. Firstly, we have mental carelessness combined with emotional disposition. The careless mental posture of a person could be poor attention and focusing skills, ignorance to important details, and nonchalance in making arguments. Followed by the emotional disposition, which could be a person's outlook on a topic emotionally rather than through a logical aspect. To avoid this kind of fallacies, one must realize that your emotions affect the way you think and make arguments. When you come to this realization, you must detach your emotions from your arguments. Moving on, we have the worldview of the arguer. The worldview could mean the cognitive network of the arguer, which are the beliefs, attitudes, habits, memories, values, and other elements that he or she may render meaningful in his or her life. It could affect the way a person thinks or acts, and in this context, the way he makes his or her arguments. To avoid it, one must recognize that his ground is based on the arguments are based on the ground that is assumed and not anything that is proven. Then we have our next point to be identifying the fallacy. An important step to avoiding fallacies is to identify the fallacies. One must familiarize themselves with informal and formal fallacies. When you become aware of formal and informal fallacies, you can be able to avoid making them an argument and also point them out in somebody else's argument. Then we have provide evidence. Provide reliable and relevant evidence to support your claims. Your evidence must be based on facts and statistics and not emotions or personal feelings. Without proper evidence, you are left to rely on your opinions, assumptions, and feelings to back up your evidence, which could lead to back up your arguments, which could lead to malicious reasoning. Then finally, we have use clear and precise language. Use language that is clear, precise, and easily understood. Avoid confusion, jumbling of words, ambiguity, silly errors like grammatical errors, spelling errors, repeated words that could be confusing to anybody reading your arguments. Rather, use words that are accurate, specific, and neutral. Language could be a powerful tool to persuade, but it can also be a way of It can also be a source of fallacies if it is vague or misleading.
ADEDOJA data operations, and I'm going to be speaking on the importance of identifying fallacies and conclusions. Identifying fallacies and conclusions is crucial in both personal, academic, and professional contexts. It helps in enhancing logical reasoning and critical thinking by enabling individuals to be able to understand argument structure, enhancing effective communication, effective debating skills, and constructing arguments, media and information literacy, sound judgment, sound decision making, and many more. Looking at understanding and argument structure, identifying fallacies and conclusions enables an individual to be able to understand the correct structure of a valid argument. This involves recognizing recognizing deductive reasoning such as modus ponens and modus tollens, as well as avoiding invalid forms of fallacies such as affirming the consequence and denying the antecedents. Moving to enhancing critical thinking, identifying fallacies and conclusions enables an individual to be able to break down an argument into its constituent parts, which will make it easier to assess and evaluate the premises, so as to be able to assess the validity of the conclusions drawn. Because critical thinking has to do with evaluating the premise, evaluating an objective and assessing an issue so as to be able to form a judgment. Therefore, this whole process makes it easier for an individual to develop his analytical and critical thinking skills. Moving to sound judgment, identifying fallacies and conclusions makes it easier or enables an individual to be able to spot fallacious judgments and therefore differentiate it from the valid ones. Identifying fallacies and conclusions makes it easy for an individual to be able to spot fallacious arguments, therefore making it easier for the individual to be able to differentiate it from the valid ones. This is very crucial in making sound judgments, as once the conclusion is identified, it's able to be very easy to assess or to know whether the premises logically support it or not. Moving to effective debate and sound arguments, identifying fallacies and conclusions makes it easier for individuals and participants in debates to be able to respond effectively to their opponents and therefore construct their own arguments. It ensures that arguments are based on valid reasoning rather than emotional abuse or personal attacks. And this helps in building cohesive and focused arguments during debates. Moving to effective communication. Effective communication has to do with clear and logical communication between individuals, and identifying fallacies and conclusions is very crucial in this process as it helps to build an individual's persuasion skills, and it also helps an individual to be able to speak or argue in a way that will convince others. In conclusion, this presentation has studied has been able to examine the various types of fallacies such as affirming the consequence, denying the antecedents, false element, minimum. You consider this type of fallacies undermine the coherence and validity of arguments. Therefore, to avoid committing such fallacies, strict adherence to logical rules and principles is crucial.